All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. It is such a schus Baruch Hashem to be back with all of you. Again, thank you to Rabbi Richter for giving shir over the last couple of days. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. So thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski, for dedicating all the Shimon Drushos this month in the schus of Refuah Shalema for Zechariah Dov Ben Perel Shira. To thank the Tilson and Wolf families from Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the Shimon Drushos this month in honor of the marriage of our children. May we all be Zochem Eretz Hashem to celebrate Simchas, have nachas from our children, and of course with best wishes for a Shana Tova. To thank Sheni and Avram Kelman for dedicating all of the Shimon Drushos this month in memory of their beloved parents, and in the schus of all those who need a refuah shalema. And to thank Selma Wolf for dedicating all the Shimon Drushos this month with immense gratitude to Hashem and with tefillos for health for all in the new year. Beautiful. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Said and Simahakin, Le'ilui Nishmas, Said's father, Moshe Ben Bashi Akoin, Zichron Devracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, then Hashem will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. Both with that, let us begin. We have a great daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chaf Gimel 23, and we are picking up Baruch Hashem on daf Chaf Gimel. On daf Chaf Gimel at the two dots. The first set of two dots, which is 2, 4, 6, about 7 lines down from the top. So the Mishnah says as follows: V'kona es atzmo bekesef. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, if you remember again, we had an interesting machlokes in the Mishnah. The Mishnah appeared in yesterday's daf on daf Chav Beis Amud Beis. So I will say, here's what we know. An Eved Kinani could be acquired with kesef, shtar, and chazaka. Fine. We then had an interesting, so then the Mishnah said, remember the model of the Mishnah always was the same thing by Kiddushin, right? A woman, quote unquote, could be acquired in Kiddushin in the following ways, and then, quote unquote, reacquires herself in the following ways. This Mishnah follows the same pattern. An Eved Kinani, which is a non-Jewish servant, could be acquired with kesef, money, shtar, document, chazaka, proprietary act demonstrating ownership. Then the Mishnah says he's able to acquire himself, a kones atzmo. So we'll say, so here's where we got into a machlokes. What was the machlokes? So kones atzmo, so remember again, let's just go through this. Rabbi Meir was of the opinion, bekesef ayidei achirim, ushtar ayidei atzmo. We're going to focus on Rabbi Meir right now. Rabbi Meir says that an Eved Kanani could gain his emancipation if someone pays off the master, but ultimately the money is from someone else. Kesef ayidei achirim. In other words, not only, of course, does the money belong to someone else, but someone else is involved in the actual transaction. And shtar ayidei atzmo. But a document of emancipation could be given to the Eved himself. So kesef ayidei achirim, money through another. Now remember again, Rashi points out, what does he mean kesef ayidei achirim? Someone else is paying the master for the Eved's emancipation. Both as opposed to what? Right, someone giving either the servant himself paying, or someone giving the servant money to pay. So kesef ayidei achirim means someone else is paying off the master to emancipate the Eved. That's kesef ayidei achirim. And shtar ayidei atzmo means the master can give the Eved himself a shtar. Fine, so let's analyze. We'll get to the other side of Machlok just a bit. So the Gemara said, "Bekesef ayidei achirim in aval lo ayidei atzmo." So remember, according to Rabbi Meir, it only works if a third party gives money to the master. But again, either if a third party gives money to the Eved to give to the master, or the Eved gives money to the master, that won't work. To which the Gemara said, "My askino." Well, what's the case? So it says, "Ilema shalomi daito." If we're talking about a case over here of where the Eved is being emancipated without his, in other words, against his will. Shlomi daito just means either he's unaware, or maybe even more, he doesn't want it. If it's shlomi daito, so michdi shamana li Rabbi Meir da'amar chov huli Eved sheyetze miyad rabo lecherus. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that emancipation is actually a chov. It's not a benefit; it's a detriment. Rabbi say it sounds strange to say that, but why would emancipation be considered to be something detrimental? But see, if you take a look at Rashi says it's the second of the short lines in Rashi. Shamina le Rabbi Meir, the parakamandegin chovchu leEved shiyotze shimhaya Eved Kohen shimhaya Eved Kohen posam and atruma v'Eved Yisrael also b'shivcha d'shchicha lepritza. Because when a person is an Eved Kanani, if they belong to a Kohen, so remember again, belonging to a Kohen entitles you to truma. And now that you are emancipated, ultimately, again, you no longer get that truma. Furthermore, as an Eved Kanani, you get to cohabit with a Shifcha Kananis, which allows for a more immoral, looser union. So an Eved enjoys that. That's a benefit to him. It's a benefit to him to not be held to such high moral standards. The loss of that ultimately represents something detrimental. So just understand, according to Rabbi Meir views emancipation as a chov, as something detrimental, not beneficial. And therefore, again, we know, V'tanina, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, ve'in chavin lo ela b'fanav. Now, we have a principle. What's our principle? Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You could do something that is objectively beneficial to someone, even without their knowledge or consent, but you cannot do something that is detrimental to someone without their knowledge and consent. So therefore, the Gemara is saying is, what's the case of emancipation? If we're talking about that the Eved doesn't know about this, right? He doesn't know about it, or he hasn't consented to it, then no one could orchestrate his emancipation, at least according to Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir holds that it's detrimental. So what's the case? Ella pshita midaito. Rather, we must be talking about a case where the Eved knows about the emancipation. He's bought in to the emancipation. Okay. V'hakamashmalan. So therefore, what is Rabbi Meir teaching us? V'hakamashmalan ayidei acherim in ayidei atzmalo. Meaning what? Rabbi Meir holds the only way to emancipate an Eved Kanani through money is through a third party. A third party is going to give the master money for the emancipation of the Eved, but the Eved himself cannot tender up money to his master. Alma, now why is that? Well, so here it is. Alma, ein kinyan la'Eved below Rabo. It's a very simple idea, says the Gemara. According to Rabbi Meir, an Eved doesn't have the ability to acquire something without his master. In other words, an Eved is owned by the master. As such, the Adon owns his hand, which means what? Anything that comes to the Eved's hand automatically becomes property of the master. So therefore, if someone were to give the Eved money to emancipate himself, the money becomes automatic property of the master. If the Eved were to have any money of his own, that money becomes the property of the master. Therefore, the only way to effect emancipation is how? For a third party to give the master money. So let's say if that's the case, ihachi, emos seifa b'shtar ayidei atzmo in ayidei achirim. But 1 second, here's the other problem. Rabbi Meir holds will say that kesef has to be ayidei achirim, but shtar can be ayidei atzmo. Right? In other words, the master could give the Eved the shtar directly. Now, I will say what we infer from that is the only way shtar works is if it's given from the master to the Eved, but not to a third party. Right? Ayidei achirim lo. V'imi daito. Now, 1 second. If we're talking about a case where the Eved is being emancipated with his knowledge, then at the end of the day, ayidei achirim amai lo. Why can't the master give the shtar to a third party to receive it on behalf of the Eved? In other words, what's wrong with that? Perhaps when Rabbi Meir says that shtar is al yidei atzmo, maybe, what does he mean? Maybe he means af al yidei atzmo. Maybe what he's saying is also saying, it goes without saying that a third party could receive the document of emancipation on behalf of the Eved. What does Rabbi Meir come to Mechadesh? That even the Eved could receive it on his own behalf. And I will say, why would you think that an Eved can't receive? Why would you think that an Eved can't receive a shtar? For the same reason that he can't tender up money, which is why the master owns his hand. So I would have thought that an Eved can't receive his own shtar, because I will say when the master hands the shtar to the Eved, what is that like? What is that like? It's like the master taking it from his right hand and putting it in his left hand. So the Chiddush is no gito v'yodo bo'in ka'achos. There's a simultaneity. What's the simultaneity? That the moment that the shtar reaches the Eved's hand, he's emancipated. And everything happens, in that simultaneous moment. But that's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah makes it sound like that the document could only go to a third party and not to the Eved. I'm sorry. The Mishnah makes it sound like the shtar could only come to the Eved and not to a third party. The Sanya b'shtar al yedei atzmo v'lo al yedei echem de Rabbi Meir. So most of the Brisa seems to indicate that no, the same way that Rabbi Meir holds that kesef can only be al yedei achirim, through a third party. So shtar can only be through the Eved himself, not a third party. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, the Olov Sefer will say, therefore we have to re-explain. Amar Abai therefore says, the Olam Shalomi Daito. Really what's happening over here is the Eved is being redeemed or is being emancipated. Rabbi said, Shalomi Daito Badai can mean without his knowledge or without his consent. Right? Without his knowledge. In other words, he's not a party to this process. The shiny kesef, so says, now let's analyze this. So remember, this is all in the shita of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says, kesef al yedei achirim, right? Money could only affect emancipation when the money is given by a third party to the master. Shtar al yedei atzmo. So Abai is saying now, this is a case of shalomi daito. The Eved does not know about the emancipation. The shiny kesef, Hoil v'kanile bal karche, miknile bal karche. So we'll say, why could a third party go ahead and affect? So remember, according to Rabbi Meir, ultimately, again, so an Eved doesn't have a kinyan without his master, right? So therefore, the Eved, obviously, he can't give the money to the Eved to give to the master, nor could the Eved use his own because he doesn't have his own money. So therefore, the only case of money, ultimately, again, is where a third party is giving it to the master. And even if the Eved doesn't know about it, why will it work? Because it's interesting. Because the same way that money could acquire an Eved against his will, money could emancipate an Eved against his will as well. In other words, they both say, what happens if a guy, stama, an akum, right, stama Gentile, sold as an Eved Kanani? He doesn't have to consent to that. In other words, that's the whole chap of being a slave. In other words, he's sold as a piece of property. So Lamaisa, the same way that he doesn't have to consent to being sold, ultimately, again, through money, he doesn't have to consent for emancipation either through money. Shtar nami. If that's the case, then Lamaisa, again, so why doesn't shtar, right? Then shtar should work as well. Right, shtar should work as well. To which the Gemara says, no. Hai shtar l'chud v'hai shtar l'chud. The two stars are different. Rabbi said there's a difference between a shtar that is used to purchase an Eved Kanani and a shtar that is used to emancipate an Eved Kanani. You can't learn out one from the other since they're different lashonos. Now, as well say, one is a lashon of kinyan, acquisition, one is a lashon of mechira, of sale. If that's the case, hai kaspa l'chud v'hai kaspa l'chud. It's different money that acquires him and different money that emancipates him. To which the Gemara says, tiva mia chatu. No. Money is money. Money is money. In other words, there's no fundamental difference. You're right, it's different monies, but lamaisa, money as an entity is the same. So what Abai is suggesting over here is like this. Abai is suggesting that we're talking about a case of shalomi daito, where the Eved is being emancipated against his will. So why does it work? So first of all, remember again, in Rabbi Meir's world, Ein kinyan la'eved below Rabbo. Remember that, right? An Eved can't acquire anything without his master. So therefore, there's no concept of giving money to the Eved to give to the master for his emancipation, nor is there any concept of the Eved giving of his own money for emancipation, because he doesn't have his own money, and whatever someone gives to the Eved automatically becomes the property of the master. So why is kesef work ayedei achirim? Even if the Eved doesn't know about it? Well, according to Abaye, the same way that money acquires against his will, so too again, money emancipates against his will as well. You can't make the same argument by shtar, because by shtar they're two different entities. Fine. Rava says, kesef, kabbalas rabo garmalo, shtar, kabbalas achirim garmalo. So Rava said, this is interesting. By kesef, Rava says, it is the acceptance of the master that causes emancipation. By the shtar, it's the acceptance of others. Now look at Rashi. What does this mean? Kabbalas kesef rabo, shemikabel rabo kesef gomerlo hishtachrer me'ilov, ve'ein ha'achirim halalu chavin ela kabbalas harav, v'arav einasa shlucho ela tzorach atzmo, u'mikaneo me'ilov. So this is very interesting. So let's go back for just a second. According to Rabbi Meir, because there's like a lot of concepts flying around over here. According to Rabbi Meir's position is emancipation is considered to be detrimental, right? Emancipation is considered to be detrimental. So because of that, so how do you emancipate an Eved without his consent? Right? If it's considered to be detrimental, how could people orchestrate a process without his knowledge and consent? So Rav is coming along and saying, listen, when people pay the master money, I will say, that's not really, it sounds strange, but that doesn't involve the Eved. Who does it involve? The master. the master's making a choice to emancipate his Eved. I will say that's the master's choice to make. It has nothing to do with the Eved. It's his choice as a master to emancipate his Eved Kanani. So whether the Eved likes it or not, doesn't like it, is totally irrelevant. Shtar, on the other hand, the only way to affect shtar is to hand it to the Eved himself. Because it's going to be handed to the Eved himself, therefore I will say that only works, of course, if the Eved consents to the process. That's why he says, so I will say, interesting what Rav is suggesting at the end is, technically speaking, you could have a case where someone accepts the shtar on behalf of the Eved. You can do that. But I will say the only time it works to accept the shtar on behalf of the Eved is when? When the Eved wants it. Because then, since the Eved wants it, someone could accept it on his behalf, because that someone is acting at what kind of capacity? What capacity? Shlichus, right? Agency. And you could be an agent for someone as long as what? It's beneficial for them. So we'll say fine. So let's pause here for just a moment. So what we've just gone through exhaustively is the position of Rabbi Meir. So let's go with what we know, right? What do we know? What's Rabbi Meir's position? What's Rabbi Meir's position? Kesef, right? Remember again, the two ways to emancipate that we're focusing on over here is kesef and shtar. According to Rabbi Meir, kesef, how do you do it? Acherim, which means what? Other people are paying the master for emancipation. That's what's happening over here, right? Shtar, and how is shtar happening? Aidi atzmo. That only works through the Eved himself. So now what we saw is a three-way machlokes as to how to go ahead and exactly understand Rabbi Meir's position. Okay, so we have a three-way machlokes, but what we do also emerge from Rabbi Meir is two other important principles. Number one, that ein kinyan le'eved below rabo. According to Rabbi Meir, an Eved does not have the ability to acquire something independent of his master. And that's going to be very important, because that's going to come up again. And number two, that ultimately Rabbi Meir holds emancipation is a chov. Right? Emancipation is detrimental, it is not beneficial, and therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, the only way to affect emancipation, again, at least, would be ultimately, again, with the Eved's consent, with the Eved's knowledge, unless, of course, it's a case of kesef, because kesef is really the Adon's decision and could be made unilaterally without the Eved. Good. I'll just tell you, I was thinking about this phrase a little bit yesterday, this idea of Zochin la'adam shelo b'fanav, ve'in chavin lo ela b'fanav. So I will say we've seen this, right, so many times. Like this is one of these Shas principles that comes up multiple times every single Masechta, and it really serves as the foundation stone that shlichus, that agency is based on. You could be an agent or self-appointed agency. You could be an agent for someone for something objectively beneficial, but not for something detrimental. Also, perhaps the phrase could also be understood in a little bit of a different way, and really speaks a lot about our relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. So I will say, if you work backwards a little bit, ein chavin la'adam ein chavin lo ela b'fanav. So I will say, if you can imagine, it's not talking about agency, but rather it's talking about life. Right? What does it mean, chavin lo b'fanav? Let's say, all of us are acutely aware of all of the things that are wrong in our lives. Right? In other words, I know what's broken, I know what's missing, and even for those of us who choose to be like a little bit, like live in a cognitive dissonance and don't like to acknowledge the things that are, I don't even mean the things that are broken inside of me. I mean, like, all of us have things that are quote unquote wrong in life. Right? Wrong in life, right? My marriage is not as I would like it to be, my kids, my parnasa, my health, my friend, whatever it is, you fill in the blank. Ein chavin lo ela b'fanav. Everybody knows the chovos, right? My chovos, the things that I don't like in life, that I'm unhappy with in life, those are always b'fanav. Those are always right in front of me. I'm acutely aware of them, and sometimes even pretty miserable about them. You know what's interesting about life, however, is Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. What we're often not fully cognizant of are all of the incredible things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us. So many things that the Ribono Shel Olam does for us, the Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. I don't even see it. I don't even see it. And so I say, I have to tell you, I was just at this great zchus to be in Eretz Yisrael. Just literally for 3 days, and just for Shabbos. And something that happened to me that never happened to me before. It's crazy. My flight on Thursday took off early, and I landed in Eretz Yisrael an hour earlier than I was supposed to be. Sunday night, the flight took off 30 minutes early, and landed an hour early also. I will say, when you're going on such a short trip like that, so the truth is, like, those hours, they mean the world. Now you'll say to yourself, okay, like a little thing, and it opened my mind to the fact, like, okay, the truth is, does it matter? Does it matter? It mattered to me with such a small amount of time, but it didn't, quote unquote, didn't matter. How many things, does the Ribono Shel Olam do for us? How many things does he do for us that we don't even see, that we don't even acknowledge, or even if we see it, we just don't really ponder it? There's so much of Zachin La'adam, so many things that Kadosh Baruch Hu does for us. Shalom b'fanav. I don't really think about it. But yet human nature is chavin, right? What's the lashon? Chavin lo, ein chavin lo, ela b'fanav. Oh, the chavos, the stuff that's not good. I'm acutely aware of every single one of those things that I am unhappy with in life. But the Zachin La'adam, the beautiful things that Kadosh Baruch Hu does for me, so often I'm not even aware of it. Sometimes I'm not aware of it because we're often not aware of the beautiful things that Kadosh Baruch Hu does for us. But even the things that I am aware, I kind of just push them back to the recesses, shalom b'fanav. So much of life, Rabbi Osai, is trying to cultivate, an attitude of gratitude and an awareness of all of the beautiful things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us, and going out of your way to look for them, because sometimes they're apparent, sometimes they're not. The stuff that's broken, the chavin, everybody's acutely aware of that. But the zachin lo the adam shelo b'fanav, how much does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do for us that we're not even aware of? And if we push ourselves just a little bit more to look at the world, to look at the life, to look at ourselves a little bit differently, we'll be overwhelmed by the enormous bracha that the Ribono Shel Olam showers upon us. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, V'cham omrim bekesef hayde asmas. We'll say that's Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say that what happens, that halacha l'maisa, Chachamim say, "Bekesef ayidei atzmo ubishtar al yidei acherim." So remember, Chachamim say kesef could be done through the Eved himself, okay, and shtar is through others. Shtar is through others. Fine. So let's analyze this a little bit more. Fine. Let's go. Says the Gemara. Because by the atzmoin, idea acherim no. Now, according to the Chachamim, only the Eved could tender up the kesef himself, but others cannot. So amai nihi nami the shalomi daito. So we'll say. So listen to this. So I'm sorry. Let me go back. Because of the atzmoin, idea acherim lo. Amai nihi nami the shalomi daito. Now we'll say, if we're talking about a case of where the Eved is unaware of what it is that's going on, michti shaman li rabbanan amri schushu sheyetze mitachas rabo yidei rabo lecheros. I will say, here we go. Here it is, and here is the fundamental machlokus between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Is emancipation a schus or not? Rabbi Meir says it is not. It is a chov. It is detrimental. The Rabbanan say it's a schus. We'll say it's schus. We'll say it's really incredible, by the way, if you think about it. How did the Rabbanan answer up? Rabbi Meir? Right? Rabbi Meir says that emancipation ultimately, again, is a chov, and he gives good reason, right? If you belong to a Kohen, you get to truma, and even if you don't even if you don't belong to a Kohen, what do you get? A shivcha kananis. You get to lead a little bit of a life of looser morality or immorality. How do the Rabbanan counter that? I want to say it's very simple. The greatest zuchos in life is the zuchos of self-determination, and the schos ultimately, again, of having responsibility over your own life. I understand you give up a lot of stuff by being avodim. Also, if you think back in Chumash Shmos, why is it that every single, it's not just Chumash Shmos, it's Chumash Shmos, Vayikra, and Bamidbar, maybe not Dvarim as much, right? Why is it that every single time Klal Yisrael got into some trouble, what do they want to do? They wanted to run back to Egypt. Was you ever wonder? It's like the $1 million question. What is waiting for you in Egypt? Why are you running back? I will say, because there is a beauty in Avdos. And what's the beauty in Avdos? What's the beauty in servitude? You are not responsible for your destiny. You don't own it. So something goes wrong, not my problem, right? Not my fault, right? Not my thing. I don't have any responsibility for it. There's a beauty in that. In fact, most of the world prefers to live that way, without personal responsibility. But I will say, the Rabbanan say, but the greatest gift in life is personal responsibility. So again, cheros, that's a schos. To be a free person, comes with awesome responsibility, but that is a schos. So listen to this. If that's the case, That's his vetanina. Zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, vein chavin lo ele b'fanav. So I'll say if the Rabbanan ultimately hold that it's a schus, then ultimately again, why can't others receive the kesef, or why can't others orchestrate kesef on his behalf? In other words, both say, so that means I know of an Eved Kanani, right? My next door neighbor is an Eved Kanani. I decide to be a nice guy. I decide to go ahead and pay the master for the Eved Kanani, not to purchase him, but to emancipate him. Yet the Mishnah, according to the Chachamim, kesef can only be ayidei atzmo, and not, sounds like not ayidei achirim. But why? If it's a schus to emancipate the Eved, anyone should be able to do it. Maybe you'll say, what does it mean when according to the Chachamim, that kesef is ayidei atzmo? Maybe it means af ayidei atzmo. Maybe it means even through the Eved himself. In other words, it goes without saying that others could go ahead and effect emancipation through money. The Chiddush is that even the Eved could do it himself. And what's the Chiddush? The Kamash Malon, the Yesh Kinyan Eved below Rabo. And we'll say, what are the Chacham arguing on? So we'll say, we see already now 2 points of contention between Ramir and the Chachamim. The Chachamim hold that an Eved does have the ability to acquire something independent of his master. So I will say what we're going to see, I'll give you a good example of this. What this would mean is, if I go over to an Eved Kanani, say, Eved Kanani, here's the deal, right? Your emancipation is $10,000. Here's $10,000 for you to buy out your emancipation. So you must remember again, according to Rabbi Meir, there's no concept like that. Why? Rabbi Meir holds, Ein kinyan la'eved below rabo. An Eved can't acquire something without his master. If the Eved acquires it, the master acquires it. Chum say, no, there is the ability for an Eved to acquire something independent of his master. So I'll say, so maybe when the Chachamim say that kesef could be al yedei atzmo, maybe it doesn't come to limit, rather it comes to expand. Even al yedei atzmo, certainly others could go ahead and effect emancipation through kesef on behalf of the Eved. That's because look at the Seifa, bishtar al yedei acherim velo al yedei atzmo. We'll say here's the problem. Look at the Seifa. What does the Seifa of the Mishnah say? The Seifa says, Seifa the Braisa says shtar al yedei acherim. Document can only be done through others, and dafka not through the Eved himself. But one second, but why can't the Eved go ahead and effect his own emancipation through a shtar? After all, we have the concept of simultaneity, that the get and his hand ultimately come together. To which the Gemara says, good maybe I will say when it says ultimately again ayidei achirim, maybe that means af ayidei achirim, that shtar ultimately again could be acquired by the Eved and even others as well. V'ha kamash balon dischos holy Eved sheyetze miyad rabo lecherus. And we'll say it's coming to teach me that halacha l'maisa, like we saw before, it's a schos. Since it's beneficial for the Eved to be emancipated, that means someone else could operate on the Eved's behalf even without the Eved's knowledge and consent. If that's the case, the Chacham is essentially saying that both cases. Na'arvinhu v'nisninhu bekasef ubishtar bein ayidei achirim bein ayidei atzma. I both say, if what you're saying is correct, then essentially the Chacham's position is both money and shtar, right, could affect emancipation, either through the Eved himself or ultimately again through others. We'll say, now watch this, because essentially what we have over here is there are 2 core principles that seem to serve as the root or the basis of the Machlokes in Rabbi Meir and the Chacham. What are the 2 core principles? Number 1, is emancipation a schus or a chov? Is it beneficial or is it detrimental? According to Rabbi Meir, it's detrimental. According to the Chacham, it's beneficial. Now, once it's beneficial, I will say, then what does that do? That then allows other people to effect emancipation on behalf of the Eved, even without the Eved's knowledge. Second point of contention, yesh kinyan le'eved or ein kinyan le'eved below rabo. Does an Eved have the ability to acquire something independent of his master? According to Rabbi Meir, no. According to the Chachamim, yes. Well, I will say, when you put those 2 things together, according to the Chachamim, then therefore what? Whether you're using kesef, whether you're using shtar, according to the Chachamim, really, either the Eved or someone else could affect emancipation through both of these mechanisms, right? So therefore, the Gemara says, well, according to Chachamim, why don't you just kind of list everything together and just say, according to Chachamim, both kesef and shtar could either be al yedei atzmo or al yedei achirim. Beautiful. Ella, rather, I will say the fact that the Mishnah doesn't list it that way indicates that that's not the case. Ella, bekesef beinai de'acher and beinai de'atzmo. Rather, what you have to say according to the Chacham is like this: Kesef, as we say, works either way. Kesef works ay de'atzmo, right? The Eved himself could tender up the money. I will say why? Why? Because according to the Chacham, what do they hold? Yesh kinyan le'eved below rabo. So therefore, the kesef could be done either through the Eved himself or through someone else. Why through someone else? Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Okay. Shtar ayidei acherim velo ayidei atzmo. But shtar, according to Chacham, could only be through others and not through the Eved himself. Why? Both say, watch this. This is wild. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Wow. Both say, listen to this. You don't see this very often. The Gemara wants to suggest that, in fact, although the Mishnah only records 2 opinions, there's actually 3 opinions recorded in the Mishnah. And who is the 3rd opinion? It's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar. What does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say? The Sanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Omer, Af b'shtar ayidei achirim v'lo ayidei atzmo. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar holds that halacha l'maisa, shtar is only through achirim and not through atzmo. Not through atzmo. So I will say, pretty incredible. So what's the pshat? What's the pshat? And the Gemara says, v'shalosh machlokes b'davar. And in fact, ultimately, again, there are actually 3 different opinions in this sugya. I will say now, before we go on, take a quick look at Rashi. See the Rashi, it says shalosh machlokos b'davar. So it's a little bit long, but it's kidai, because what it's going to do is it's going to frame the entire sugya for us. So here we go. Rabbi Meir, we'll say, if you could underline Rashi. Actually, this is an incredible Rashi. Rashi explains all 3 shitas right here. Rabbi Meir, Islay b'kesav ayidei acherim, v'afilu shalom idaito, v'lo ayidei atzmo. So also remember again, Rabbi Meir holds kesef ayidei acherim, right? Not ayidei atzmo. Right? Why? Ein kinyan le'eved below rabo. Right? Because an eved can't acquire anything. Therefore, kesef can only be done through someone else. Ubishtar ayidei atzmo v'lo ayidei acherim. Right? Shalom idaito. But shtar can only be done through the eved himself, not through others. Not through others. If emancipation is being affected without the eved's consent, because he holds ultimately again it's a chov, it's detrimental, and therefore again. That's the position of Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, so Rabbi Meir holds again, one more time, kesef al yedei acherim, right? Kesef can only be done through others, because an eved can't acquire anything without the master. So kesef is to be acherim. What about shtar? So let's just fine tune the shtar. Shtar is al yedei acherim, but could also be al yedei atzmo. How? If ultimately again, if it is shtar is al yedei atzmo, with the Eved's consent. In other words, you cannot go ahead and emancipate an Eved without his knowledge. Why? Because ultimately, again, the emancipation is a chov. And ein chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. That's why shtar only could come to the Eved himself, because he has to know about his emancipation. What about the hand? Right? Isn't his hand the Adon's hand? Simultaneity. Gita v'yada b'ayin kachas. We're going to skip Rabbi Shimon Elazar in just a moment. Right? The Rabbanon in Rashi, which is about 3 lines from before Rashi gets wide. So remember again, the Rabbanon hold kesef ayidei acherim b'nei atzmo. Kesef works again either through others or through the Eved himself. Right? Why? Because remember again, according to the Rabbanon, emancipation is a schus. And they also hold yesh kinyan le'eved below rabo. Incredible. Ubishtar beinai deichem beinai de'atzmo. So let's listen to this. This is actually fascinating, and then we're going to go back to the Gemara. See, Rabbi Meir's position is, as we mentioned it before. It turns out, Rabbi said that according to the Chacham, listen to this, both for kesef and for shtar, it can either be done through the Eved or through others. The Chacham have the most comprehensive position. Why? Because Rabbi said they hold, number 1, emancipation is a schos, right? It's a benefit. And number 2, a servant could acquire something independent of his master. Well, once you hold of those 2 concepts, then kesef could be through others, through the Eved, right? Shtar could be through others or through the Eved. It works. So I will say, so who's the opinion in the Mishnah that says that shtar could only be done ayidei acherim? That's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Right? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar holds that ultimately, again, he holds that both kesef and shtar, listen to this, both kesef and shtar could only be done ayidei acherim. Could only be done ayidei acherim, right? Why? What's the logic? I'm just going to read it in Rashi first. I'm sorry, I went out of order on Rashi. Shimon Elazar islay ben bekesef b'shtar ayidei acherim tekasaver schusu lo v'lo ayidei atzmo degabe kesef islay in kinyan le'eved below rabo degabe shtar less like gitav v'odon kachas. Both said this is incredible. This is incredible. I'm sorry, it's just very exciting. So both listen to this. Shimon Elazar holds like this. He's the hybrid shita. Get ready for this. And after you hear this, it actually all beautifully falls into place. It's like an Eved Kenani mosaic. They'll say, listen to this. So they'll say, now watch, Shimon Elazar holds like this. Shimon Elazar holds that it is a schus for an Eved to be emancipated, right? But he holds ein kinyan le'eved below rabo, right? He rejects that concept, or I should say, he holds that an Eved does not have the ability to acquire independence of his master. He also rejects simultaneity. Right? So we'll say, so watch this. See, he holds that it is a schus to be emancipated. But because ultimately, again, an Eved doesn't have a kinyan without his master, therefore money could only come through who? Through who? Through a third party, acherim. And because he rejects simultaneity, shtar could only be acquired how? Through others as well. Incredible. Incredible. So therefore, what you have is Rabbi Meir ultimately saying, like Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah, that ultimately, again, it is kesef ayidei acherim, shtar al yedei atzmo. The Chachamim hold that kesef and shtar are both al yedei acherim and al yedei atzmo. And suddenly we've discovered this new shita, Rabbi Shimon Elazar, who holds kesef and shtar only al yedei acherim. Only al yedei acherim. Yet, so I will say, but yet, again, but why? Not yet. He still accepts the fact that emancipation is a schos, but because he holds ein kinyan le'eved below rabo, an eved can't acquire without his master, and he rejects the concept of simultaneity of gita v'yodeban ka'achos. Therefore, everything emancipation could only happen through a third party, both with keziv and with shtar. Incredible. So let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says. Good. So my time, Rabbi says, my time Rabbi Shmuel Silber. What's Rabbi Shmuel Silber's logic? Why does he hold this way? Gamar la me isha. He makes gzir shav of la from isha. Ma isha achiyotzi getler shosheno shelo. Both say just like by a woman, in order for divorce to work, what has to happen? The get has to leave the husband's domain and go into a different rishos. Right? If the get remains in the husband's domain, so ultimately again she's not divorced. Both say so too again, in order for a document of emancipation to work, what has to happen? It ultimately again has to leave the domain of the master. What's the problem? According to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, in kinyan le'eved below rabo. When you place something into the eved's hand, whose hand are you placing it into? Whose hand are you placing it into? The master's. So therefore, giving an eved a shtar doesn't accomplish anything. What will accomplish something? Giving the shtar to a third party that removes the shtar from the domain of the master, and therefore again affects emancipation. By Rabbo. So Rabbi asked the question. We'll say with base. The Rabbi Shmuel Elazar, Eved Kenani mau sheyasa shliach lekabel gito miyad rabo. Very interesting shiloh, Rabbi say. So listen, okay, so now according to Shimon Elazar, right, an Eved cannot receive the document of emancipation directly from his master. Why not? Because that's effectively like the master taking it from his left hand, putting it into his right hand, and Rabbi Shimon Elazar adopts the Gzir Shav of law from Isha. Just like by Isha, a get only works when it leaves the domain of the husband, so too again, by an Eved, a document, a Shtar Shichra only works if it leaves the domain of the master. So here's the Shiloh. Ultimately, again, could Eved Kinani, right? So Reuven owns an Eved Kinani. So according to Shimon Elazar, Reuven cannot give the document of emancipation right into the hand of Eved Kinani. Can Eved Kinani appoint a shliach? Okay, you can't give it to me. Give it to my shaliach. Does that work? So Kevan de Gamar la mi isha ki isha. So on one hand, since this whole thing is learned out from Gzira Shav of la from Isha, then what? Just like a woman has the ability to appoint a shaliach to accept her get, so to the Eved Kinani should be able to appoint a shaliach. O Dilma, Isha di ihi matzi mekabelas gita, shliach nami matzi mishavya. Eved di'ihu lo mekabel gita, shliach lo matzi mashvu. Now, I will say this is actually very interesting. In general, we say, when could you appoint the shaliach? when you yourself have the ability to accomplish the task at hand, but you're choosing instead to create agency, right? Remember again, my agent is an extension of me, which means my agent can be no more powerful than I am. So why is a woman able to create a shaliach to accept her get? Why? Why? Because she could accept the get herself. But an Evet Kanani, maybe he can't appoint a shliach. Why? You can't appoint a shliach to do something that you yourself can't do. That you yourself can't do. So therefore, again, if halacha l'maisa, if the Evet Kanani can't accept the get, maybe he can't appoint a shliach. So I will say, so this is the shaila. This is the shaila. So is an Evet Kanani? I will say we're on Chav Gimel base 23b, 6 lines down. So this is the shaila. We've established now again, only according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, we've established that according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar. As I said, just want to point out, remember, according to Chacham and Rabbi Meir, they both agree that an Evet Kanani can accept his own get. According to Rabbi Meir, it's because of Gito V'yado Bain Ka'achos, right? And according to Chachamim, ultimately again, because Yesh Kin La'eved Below Rabo, and ultimately again, Zachin La'adam Shal B'fanav, fine. So I will say, so now, only according to Shimon Elazar, he's the only one who holds that an Evet Kanani cannot receive his own get. So can he appoint a shaliach? So Basar Devaya Hadir Pashta. So I'll say after his question was asked, it was answered. Pashta la miisha ki isha. No, I will say Rabbi Shimon Elazar's entire shita is built on the gzera shava of la from isha. Remember again, that gzera shava is the one that taught us what? That the same way that by a get, the get has to leave the domain of the husband for it to be effective. So too by a shtar shikrar, the shtar has to leave the domain of the master for it to be effective. Well, if you're going to have the gzera shava, then have the gzera shava, and therefore again, just like a woman could appoint a shaliach, an Evet could appoint a shaliach. So I will say, so it sounds like what the Gemara is suggesting over here is, according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, although an Evet Kanani cannot go ahead and receive the get himself, he can appoint a shaliach to receive it. The Ella Had Amrav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua. But this is beautiful. But one second. Let's talk about what we learned before. What about what Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua said, Hani Kohani. And Rabbi said, this is a fascinating machlokes. So the Gemara says, it's actually a machlokes. Here the Gemara doesn't frame it as a machlokes, but the Gemara discusses, again, Kohanim. Who are the Kohanim, the shluchim of? Right? Are they shluchei didan? Are they our? In other words, is it Klal Yisrael shluchim, or are they the Ribono Shel Olam shluchim? Right? Whose shaliach are they? So the Gemara suggests over here, Sahani Kohani Shluchei Drachmananinu. Kohanim must be the agents of the Ribono Shel Olam. Because by the way, just to understand how one thing I'm most jealous of in this world, the only thing I'm actually jealous of in this world is being a Kohen. I mean, of not being a Kohen. I'm jealous of Kohanim. I would say this just like pours fuel on the fire. Can you imagine being called the agent of the Ribono Shel Olam? Right? That's your job. That's your job, right? Your job is to be the agent of the Ribono Shel Olam. Also, shlucho shel adam kimoso, right? Person shliach is like the shaliach is like the what do they call the maker? Who's the guy who makes the agent? Principal, right? The principal, right? Just like the principal. So that means if Kohanim are the shluchim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that means that a Kohen, mamish is more like the Ribono Shel Olam than everyone else. It's incredible. In any event, so shluchei drachmaninu, it must be that Kohanim really are agents of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not of Klal Yisrael. Why not? Listen to this. Shluchei didan ninhu. Because if you would think that Kohanim are the agents of Klal Yisrael, mi'ika midi da'anan lo matzinan avdinan ve'inhu matzi avdi. And I will say, remember, this is what we just said before. In order to be a shleich, I will say, so leaving aside Evet Kanani, right, because Evet Kanani is being learned out from la mi'isha. But in general, one of the principles of agency we have, I will say, is what? Your agent can't be any more powerful than you yourself are. Right? So in other words, whatever I can do, my agent can do. And whatever I can't do, then what? My agent can't do either. So it can't be that the Kohanim are our agents. Right? It must be the Kohanim are the... Why? I will say why. Because if I roll into the Beis HaMikdash and I decide, you know what? Today, I am offering up a carbon. Can I do that? I mean, you can do it, and you chayiv misa, right? I can't do that. So it can't be the Kohanim are my agents, because the Kohanim can do things that I can't do, which must mean that Kohanim are really the agents of the Ribono Shel Olam and not of me. The Gemara says, "Velo v'ha'avda." So the Gemara says, "I'm sorry." Da'anan lo matzina avdina ve'inu matzi avdi. Velo v'ha'avda di'ihu lo matzi mekabel gita u'shaliach matzi mashvi. So the Gemara says, "But one second." But that's not true. In other words, based on what we just said, it's not a true paradigm anymore. Eved Kanani is a perfect example of this. Eved Kanani cannot receive his own get, but yet what? Again, I will say it's only Shimon Elazar, but yet what? He could appoint an agent. So you see from here that sometimes agents can be more powerful than the principal. If that's the case, Kohanim could still be our agents, even though they could do things we can't do. To which the Gemara says, Velohi Yisrael lo sheikh b'taras kavanos klal, Eved shaykh begin. We'll say there's a very big difference. It could be that your agent could do something that you can't do as long as you have a part in the general halachic framework. So I will say, for example, so a Stam Yisrael doesn't have a sheikhus, right? There's no halachic connection. I don't have any halachic involvement in karbanos. In other words, I bring karbanos. What he means is in the avoda side of things, right? In the avoda side of things, in the sacrificial offering part, I don't have any involvement in that. So because I have no involvement in that, therefore what? I can't create agency for that. But again, when it comes to a document of emancipation, ultimately, even though according to Shimon Elazar, an Eved can't receive it because of a technicality, he's in the framework. He's in the framework. And if you're in the framework, then maybe halacha l'maisa, you could appoint an agent, and your agent may be able to do something that you can't do. But as long as you have a shaykhus to the framework in which the agency is operating, that's fine. Disanyo, nir nadvarim, she'eved mekabel gito shel chavero miyad rabo shel chavero, avalo miyad rabo shel abos. Is actually interesting. Why? What's the proof to this? Let's listen to this. Let's say you have two guys who are avadim kinanim, buddies, right? Buddies. And we'll say, so what happens? So they're Baruch Hashem, they're both right, they're both being emancipated. So what could you do? Rabbi saying, Eved A could receive the shtar shecher for Eved B, and Eved B could receive the shtar shecher for Eved A. Right? That works. That works. Why? Because Lamaisa, again, in both of these cases, the shtar shecher is leaving the domain ultimately of the master. So what do you see from there, Rabbi? So what do you see from there? You see from there that halacha Lamaisa, an Eved has a shaykhus, he has a halachic connection to receiving, to being an agent for document of emancipation. Okay, according to Shimon Elazar, he can't receive his own. But because there's a shaykhus to it, therefore what? Therefore, Allah Lamaisa, he has the ability to appoint an agent. However, again, for something you have no shaykhus, it turns out we have to modify it a little bit. You can appoint an agent to do things that you yourself can't do. As long as what? As long as you have a connection to the halachic framework in which the agent is operating. But if you can't do something at all, you have no shaykhus to the halachic framework, then you can't appoint an agent. So for example, Kohanim must be the agents of Hashem and not the agents of Klal Yisrael. Why? Because a Kohen could do things that I cannot do. I have no shaykhus to it. So he can't be operating as my agent. But yet, according to Shimon Elazar, an Eved Kanani could go ahead and appoint a shaliach to receive his get, even though he can't receive the get himself. Why? Because an Eved Kanani could operate as an agent for another Eved Kanani's get, so he's shaykh to the concept, and therefore he could appoint an agent. Fine. So let's remember again, the Mishnah ended off by saying, as long as the money belongs to others. Let's at least read a few lines. So what are they arguing about? The Rabbi Meir Silber, Ein kinyan la'eved below rabo, ve'ein kinyan la'isha below baila. Rabbi Meir holds, in general, that an Eved cannot have a kinyan without his master, just like a wife really can't acquire anything independently of her husband. Rabbanan hold, Yesh kinyan ever below rabo, ve'esh kinyan la'isha below baila. The Chama, on the other hand, hold that no, it's not true. Right? An Eved has the ability to acquire independent of his master, just as a wife has the ability to acquire independently of her husband. Amar Rabba, Amar of Sheshus. No, the Kuli Alma ain't kinyan la'eved below rabo. Everyone agrees that an Eved cannot acquire something without his master. Ve'ein kinyan li'isha below baila. and a woman doesn't have the ability to acquire something without her husband. I will say, obviously, it's for two very different reasons. It's because a husband is entitled to her earnings, right? So therefore, again, in return for support, so therefore, because of that, halacha l'maisa, he's entitled to everything. What's the case here? So we'll say we're going to stop over here for this one today. We're going to see the point of contention is in a situation where someone gave the Eved money, but ultimately with the condition that the master has no rights in it. Does such a conveyance work or not? We'll stop here. So we'll say what we end off with is our three machlokes. We have Rabbi Meir, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Ultimately, again, all agreeing that kesef and shtar will work. Three machlokes, how it works. Conclusion and resolution in Mirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Thank you. How are you? Baruch Hashem. Great to see you.